All right, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode here at Techology. And my name's Josh, and of course, I have with me Susan. Susan, I didn't get how to pronounce your last name. How do you say that?
My last name is Myberg, so I always tell people not your
Myberg.
Berg, but Myberg. It's a good way to
Got it.
remember.
Got it. Yeah. So Susan Myberg, I wanted to have her on the show because she actually helped me land. She helped me help form a lot of my thinking around landing a job when I was in coding boot camp. And so she actually was at my coding boot camp. She was the career coach specialist, or I'm not sure what your job title specifically was, but. And so I thought she was always giving gold. I was like, this is good. I'm going to do that. She told me to go to a meetup and I became a co-leader of a meetup. Everything she said, I did, and I tried to, I should say. And and so far it's worked out for me. So been doing software stuff for a while, but enough about me. Susan, so tell us a little bit about yourself, who
Yeah,
you are.
thanks. Also, I will say, Josh, that I think that's the key is just like taking the advice and doing what people throw at you and see what works for you. So
Seriously.
I think that's a lot of what your success is from, is like taking that feedback and taking that advice. So kudos to you.
Right.
So a little bit about me. I'm a career coach. I've been in the industry for about 6 years. I've worked in traditional university settings, vocational schools, and then I've been in the boot camp sector specifically for about 4 years. And I've worked in all different aspects of career services. I've taught, I've worked on the employer side, the student side, the job placement side. And my real passion is on the curriculum development side, and then also using that to prepare people and teach them the skills, the tools, the resources they need to conduct a successful job search, because I believe firmly that it really should be like a lifelong thing, right? I'm not helping you get your first job. I'm helping you create a career. So that's a little bit about me. And so I worked at Coding Dojo. That was the first boot camp I worked at, where I met you, Josh. And right now I'm working for Thinkful, where I've been for 2 years. And Thinkful is owned by Chegg. So for those of you who are familiar, Chegg is the online book rental education prep internship.com company. They do a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's super, super cool. So how'd you get started with tech and helping people land jobs? And is that a passion of yours? And you fell into it? Tell us that story.
Yeah, I totally fell into it. In fact, I fell into career coaching quite accidentally too. So in addition to coaching, I'm also an actor, and a friend of mine was working at a school, art school, and they were looking for a student advisor, which I did a little bit of in college. So she gave me a job, which was really nice of her. And then I just really fell in love with it from there. And it really resonated with my strengths. And one thing led to the next. I came across Coding Dojo, again, quite accidentally. I remember they were hesitant to hire me because I didn't have any tech background, but they said yes anyway. And then I really fell in love with tech. And I think it's because people who aren't in the industry might not realize this, but it's such a creative field. And so that really, I'm a very creative person. And so to help people find that creativity and that making that transition, it's so rewarding.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I felt like, one of the things that I try to tell people, I'm like, hey, you might feel like a coding misfit, right? Like where you feel like you don't fit in. I have this vision of my mind of what these people are supposed to look like, and they're these very organized boxes and numbers and this robot thing. And I'm super creative as well, and I found a spot too to thrive and work on stuff and make things beautiful. And yeah, I'm totally with you. That's an awesome thing. All right, so I have a hot seat question for you, just super random. You ready? All right. So tell us, what was one thing you thought was super cool in middle school?
NSYNC. I was obsessed with NSYNC. It's so funny. We just watched that show on Hulu, Pen 15, which is about these two middle school girls. And I realized I was the most basic middle schooler ever, because everything in that show, I was like, yes, oh my gosh, yes.
That's awesome.
So whatever was basic in middle school in the late 90s, early 2000s is what I was into.
Totally. Do you remember those super fat shoes? Were you ever on skate culture at all? The Osiris's, remember those?
Dingos and the Vans. Those are back now too. Those Vans that were the platform Vans. I'm in that stage now where the things I was into in middle school is becoming trendy again. So that's also weird. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I want to. Your expertise is in career coaching, and we're gonna hopefully jump into that in a second. But specifically, I want to chat with you a little bit about coding bootcamps. So some of my audience may not know, what is a coding bootcamp? How does it work? Could you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I like to think of a coding bootcamp as sort of an accelerated learning platform or space environment. It's called a boot camp because it's usually a lot of
Mm-hmm.
intense learning. You're learning a lot of information in a shorter period of time than you would in a traditional college or university setting. And what's unique about boot camps is that it's a really awesome alternative for people who don't want to spend 2 years or 4 years getting a degree and pay tons of money. So there's definitely a cost benefit there. And then the other benefit that's unique to boot camps that you might find in a traditional educational setting is that it's a for-profit organization usually, right? Which means that it's really important to boot camps that their students get a return on their investment, that they go
Mm-hmm.
through this program and they get something for it at the end of the day. So there's usually also really strong, robust career services programs in boot camps. And that's really like a part of the boot camp. So while most
Right.
boot camps don't promise you a job, in fact, I would stay away from boot camps that promise you a job. Most of
I
them
want to talk to you
do
about that.
have a really great career services team in place that works one-on-one with the students to prep them for their job search, guide them through the job search, and ultimately help them attain that outcome.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So the way I kind of like view coding bootcamp is like you might go to school to like be a engineer. Maybe you work at NASA. But if someone took all the like extra stuff and then got rid of it and only focused on the stuff that you would do in your day-to-day life, that's what coding bootcamp is. They do that except for with coding.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, some of the best boot camps are those ones that sort of emulate that apprentice setting, right? Where you really are like building projects and working with other engineers and things like that. So 100%, it really does try to emulate that day to day that you would experience on the job for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. So like, do coding bootcamps like legit get you jobs?
That's a tricky question. I think that they
Okay.
absolutely have the power to. I also think that individuals shouldn't, it's not a magic ticket like anything else in life. It's not like some
True.
miracle thing that's going to fix all your problems and
Right.
make you happy forever. I absolutely believe any other education that you're going to get, what you put in is what you get out. So if
Okay.
you, like I said to you at the beginning, if you really put your energy into it and focus on it and you take the advice you give and you work with your career coach, yes, I would be really shocked if you have trouble transitioning into a role. But you have to put in that work and that effort in order to make it successful.
So do you think, in your opinion, you could be a little biased, for your work, but are coding boot camps like still worth it in 2021? Is that, you think,
I
has
think
has
they're
the ship sailed?
absolutely,
That's the question.
yeah, no, I think they're absolutely worth it. I'll be honest, when I first started working in boot camps, there was definitely this idea from employers, like they were hesitant to interview coding grads, and you really had to like sell them and like talk about why these programs are worthwhile and generate great
Hmm.
developers. And I think as boot camps have been around and more people go through them and get jobs, employers are really open to boot camp grads. In fact, I talk to employers a lot of times who prefer to hire boot camp grads over people out of like with CS degrees, because boot camp grads tend to have more tenacity. They tend to think outside the box. They tend to be a little more creative. So a lot
Interesting.
of companies actually want people like that. As to right now, there's such a big conversation around diversity and like bringing people from different walks of life into the team.
Right.
And boot camp grads tend to be those people who have really unique backgrounds in music or arts or whatever else, and now want to be a programmer. So companies really value that. So anyway, that's all to say that yes, they're so still worth it, especially if you're someone who already has a degree and has been working in a field for a while and want to transition. I think it's an excellent route to go.
Right. Would you say that like they would transition? So if I had a degree in finance and I wanted to jump into tech, I could take a coding boot camp. And then would you say that the reason you said transition would be like because I can get a job in finance as a developer, like easier because I understand the industry? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the biggest things I do when I coach. If I'm working with someone who already has a really strong background in education, finance is a big one, education is another big one. I do normally coach them to say, okay, let's combine your education background with your tech
Right.
background and find that. But also other people, I'll never forget one of the most amazing, like sort of career transitions I've seen was I worked with a grad that was a UPS delivery guy, and he'd never
Okay.
coded. He got some random family inheritance and decided to put it towards this coding boot camp. And then the first job he got was the one he interviewed for. First interview he got the job. It was a remote role. So
So
yeah, it
cool.
was like, yeah. And it was one of those things where he was an example like you of someone who really put in the work and
Hmm.
he got a reward.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the questions floating around is like, how do I pay for coding bootcamp?
Hmm.
And so can you speak to that? What are some options there?
Yeah, different boot camps have different options for sure. Most boot camps will have some sort of loan program in place where you can take out a loan and then pay that back once you're done with the program. A lot of boot camps, including Thinkful, are now doing different programs like income share agreements or stipend agreements, or ones where this is quite common now too, where you don't have to pay until you get a job, or they'll do something where you don't have to pay, but then when you do get a job, they take like a cut of your paycheck for X number of months. So I would just look around, do your research, ask that question, right? When you're going through the admissions process or going to the info session, they should definitely be knowledgeable and give you all the options. So paying the full amount out of pocket is not necessarily the only way to finance that.
So like, I guess one thing I'd like to add to that too would be like, when I paid for coding bootcamp, I put it on like a credit card. It was like a 18-month in the future thing. And I was like, I hope I can land a job in 18 months. But for me, like that was a super, what I love about the gentleman, the GPS guy, it was like an investment into
Mm-hmm.
my future. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew that, I actually come from church world. So like pastor ministry, like that's where I come
Mm-hmm.
from. And and there's, and since I transitioned from that, like realizing like I don't have a skill set that's gonna like really help me make money for my family other than being in that specific space. And so I think for me it was like an investment into my future.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
and I thought
think
that was kind of cool.
that's such a good point. And I think too, it's a matter. What's great about that is that you probably knew yourself and knew that, especially if you have a family, if you knew that you made that choice to put that on that credit card, that would be a motivating factor. And I think if for folks listening or watching, if you know that's something that will motivate you, then I would say, yeah, go that route for sure.
Yeah, that did. And I knew I needed to sign up for a boot camp because there's a couple ways you can do like some self-taught stuff.
Hmm.
I do not have the like fortitude to make myself like sit there and go through lessons. I'm like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, this is killing me. And
Yeah.
I'll just find an email will pop up and but like now when I have money on the line and a good chunk of it for coding bootcamp,
Yeah.
that kind of helps
Right.
too. So what does an everyday like if I go to boot camp, like what does an everyday in the life look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends from boot camp to boot camp. This isn't so much the case now, but there are some boot camps that are in person and then others that are online. And then within those boot camps, too, the online ones, there's usually two options where you can have what's sometimes referred to as an immersive program where it's like full time, and then maybe one that's part time, right? If you're not wanting to quit your job and you're doing it
Mm-hmm.
on the side. So it depends where you're looking at. But let's say that you're going to full-time boot camp. Normally what happens is you have a really clear structure, just like a regular education setting where there's lessons that are taught and then you'll code. Depending on the boot camp, you might code with peers or by yourself and learn lessons as you go through. And the lessons all build on top of one another and then ultimately culminate in some projects. And that's really where you'll build your relevant experience, what you can speak to and use as your portfolio when you're in your job search. And then depending on how, and normally if it's a full-time program, you're in school 8 hours a day. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's additional learning outside of that, depending on how much more you want to get involved or how deep you want to go.
Right. That's good. That's cool. And so like how do I know if I'm the right kind of person like for coding bootcamp?
Yeah, I think you have to be a really hard worker. I think you have to love it. I always, when I worked at Coding Dojo, I did some of the like outreach efforts and the open houses and things like
Sure.
that. And I always told people that before you join a boot camp, do, like you said, a free lesson, do Udemy, do a course. I would try to do 20 hours of coding before you decide whether it's the right fit. Because if you don't love it, it's not going to work. It's not going to be successful because
Right.
it's hard work. So I would say you have to be a hard worker. You have to really love it. And then depending on the kind of boot camp, whether you're doing online or in person, if you're doing an online program, you have to be someone who's individually motivated too. You have to be able to motivate yourself because even though you have an instructor and peers and things like that, you're alone, really.
Right.
So you have to be someone who's got a lot of self motivation as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I want to talk to you about the job guarantee boot camp thing.
Mhm.
So you mentioned that. So you said, why should we stay away from boot camps that job guarantees? What does that mean?
Yeah. So let me just be clear, right? Thinkful, where I work currently, we have a tuition reimbursement guarantee, and
Okay.
that says that if you don't get a job within a certain time period and you met a certain set of criteria during your time in the program, then we'll give you your money back. And so that's an entirely different situation. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because there's usually clear guidelines, and usually that tuition reimbursement set up in a way to help assure that you will get a job. So that's something different. What I'm referring to more are boot camps. It's that same adage of, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. So
Okay.
if they're promising you the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, I would probably steer clear, simply because, like I said, I can't promise a grad a job, because I don't know if there's going to be a pandemic or a market crash, or I have no
True.
idea. And so I think boot camps that don't make it clear that a lot of this is on you as well. Yes, we're going to help you, and we have resources, and we're here to share our knowledge. But if you don't meet us halfway and put in the work, it's not going to be successful. So anything that makes it sound like it's like too good to be true or too easy, I would be weary of.
Okay. Okay. So when let's say I'm interested in a coding boot camp, and I'm interested, I have this idea of, I'd like to do this. So what are some things I should look for in a coding boot camp?
Yeah, I would look for, I know I'm biased, but I would really look into their career services team. I would what do they offer? What all is involved in it? What are those stipulations you have to meet? Do you have a career coach one-on-one? When are you introduced to the career coach? Because that really is such a big part of your experience. The other thing I would look at is the technologies they teach and how relevant that is to the kinds of jobs you want or your market. Different
Mm-hmm.
technologies are more popular in different markets. So especially if you're looking at an online program, Thinkful teaches JavaScript and React, but if you're in a market that uses Java, then that's not going to be helpful. So look
Right.
at that. And then the other thing I would look at as well is, and I'm specifically talking about like web development boot camps, is look at the curriculum too and see, is it project based? That's really important, because like I said, those projects, that's your work experience, right? That's what you're walking
Right.
out the door with to show to employers. So it's really important that the program is project based as well.
Okay, that's some helpful stuff to talk about. Yeah, I agree with you on the career services and how important that is. Like, once, like I said, I think I said earlier, but like I would, so our coding bootcamp would have these lessons, and people would come to these lessons, and the class would show up, and then they say, hey guys, don't forget, tonight is resume review night, like with someone, like it'd be with you or it'd be with someone on your team.
Mhm.
And so I just remember showing up and being like, why? You're not here to learn to code. Like, you're here to learn to get a job. Isn't that your real goal? Like, coding is the vehicle to get you to your destination, which is a job. So I
Mhm.
think I completely agree. I think that it's important to have a really strong career service. So what does that look like? Like, I'm looking at different boot camps. Like, how do I
Yeah.
actually tell?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I was just thinking about that as you were saying what you were saying. And I think the difference is, for my money, I want to go to a boot camp that places an emphasis on career services from the beginning of the program.
Yeah.
I would want to go to a program that has, in addition to program specific curriculum, has career services curriculum as well, so that I'm learning those job search techniques as I go through the program, so that when
Hmm.
I graduate and I start working with my career coach, that I'm ready to hit the ground running. Because if you don't have that in the program, then you're learning all this stuff. And then by the time you're done with the program, then you have to start all over. You have to build your resume. You have to build your network. You have to build your LinkedIn. And it just wastes time. So I would look for a program that does both of those things at the same time. And then I would also look for a program that offers one-on-one career support. Like, you have your one career coach who you work with for an extended period of time. And then I would look into
Right.
those people, right? Use LinkedIn. Go look at who's the career coach or career manager or career specialist at the boot camps you're interested in, and look at their resume. What's their background? Do you find that compelling or interesting?
That's awesome. So here's an awkward question, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's pretty easy to see. But I know you worked at Coding Dojo. That's where I met you, and then now
Mhm.
you're working at Thinkful, and those are both two different coding boot camps. And so, can you tell me? I think it'd be rude to ask which one's better. I feel like that'd be an unfair question. But I feel like, but maybe some of the pros and cons, or like, what are some of the differences you've seen when like coming from one boot camp to another?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I don't necessarily think that there's something as like a good boot camp or a bad boot camp. I really think it boils down to what you want out of the experience and then finding the boot camp that matches that. What I will say is the biggest difference between Coding Dojo and Thinkful is that Coding Dojo teaches 3 full stacks, or if you do the online program, I think it's 2 full stacks. So they teach multiple technologies, whereas Thinkful just teaches JavaScript, HTML, React. So it's a little more streamlined in that regard. There's benefits to both. I think if you learn multiple stacks, you become more of a generalist, if you will, which is not a bad thing. And then if you go to a program like Thinkful, you really are a lot stronger in like front-end design, perhaps. So I would say that's the biggest difference. And then the other really big difference between the two is that Thinkful is strictly an online program. So we don't have any like brick and mortar locations. It's all online. Everyone's online. And Coding Dojo offers online classes, but also offers in-person classes in certain locations. So I would say if you're someone who knows that, and again, right now, I'm sure it's all up in the air, but if you're someone who knows like, I need to go to a place, I need to have peers around me, physical people who can help me, then I would go the route of a program like Coding Dojo versus the online setting.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's key too. I think for me, I went to Coding Dojo. I had 2 full stacks, which meant that I could apply to 2 different kinds of jobs. Like I can head the web developer route or the Python route, because those are the 2 that I did. So that was a plus. But I do feel because it was 2, I did not learn anything very deeply. Yeah. So I could do things, I was kind of, so that's a plus and minus, right? There's more opportunity for you to apply to 2 different kinds of directions, take it 2 different, your career. But also like, I was like, I only know this deep. And so anything more advanced, I'm like, I'm out. So just my 2 cents, I guess.
I would say that's accurate for sure. That being said, with the students I work with at Thinkful, there are some who feel the same way you do about what they learned there. And so I think it's just also part of the nature of those programs. That's another thing to add to the list of things that you should have if you want to do a boot camp is curiosity and like a desire to learn, because you're constantly going to be learning. Even when you're done with the program, you're still going to be learning.
Good stuff. I definitely learn all the time on my job. I'm like still picking stuff up. So let's talk about the hardest part of this bootcamp experience is not so much learning to code, it's actually landing that first job. And so I have some job questions that I want to throw at you. So let's start talking about resumes. What do you love to see on resumes? Let's just give us some general tips on resumes.
Yeah. First things first, I think there's this common misconception that your resume has to be flashy or be super designed. And I think for web development, that's not the case at all. Employers normally take 6 seconds to scan your resume. So if you're making it hard for them to get that information, you're not going to get an interview. So keep it simple. That's the first thing that I'll say. I love to see it simple. Don't make it hard to get your information or like understand your story and your narrative. The second 2 things that really, really make such a big impact is your projects. Put your projects on there, but don't just put your projects on there. Treat them like work experience. I don't want to know what your project does. I can figure that out by going to the site. I want to know what you contributed to the project, right? How did you utilize your skills to build that? Show off your work experience. And then the second thing that's really important, don't shy away from your background. People are so ashamed of their backgrounds. And that's like your special magic. That's your unicorn power. Is your background. So take some time, work with your career coach to identify what are those strengths from your background that transfer to the tech industry, and then really take some time to craft that on your resume. The other thing employers love to see is like contributions, accomplishments. So in your work history, even if you worked at Starbucks, were you employee of the month, or were you the like fastest barista? What are the things that like you accomplished or that you contributed? And that will tell employers so much about who you are, what kind of employee you'll be, and what you're going to bring to the team.
Yeah, that's great. I love that what you said about the past experiences. So once again, I came from church world. And so right out of boot camp, the first job I applied for, and I actually made it to the technical interview. It was for this like Christian company, and they had an e-commerce side of things, and they needed developers. So, but like I leaned very heavily on my past. I was like, hey, like I used your products every day. That helped me get my foot in the door, and I made it all the way to the coding thing, and then I messed up. But yeah, but at the same time, like I used that to help me get my.
And you didn't mess up. It just wasn't your job.
It wasn't my job. Oh, that's nice. Just some mindset stuff right there. So like, let's talk about the worst things. Tell us a horror story if you have any of like of things you've seen on resumes, or maybe just things that people do that are common that's bad. Don't do
Yeah,
that.
I think common mistakes is like the flip side of what I just said, like not including projects or like really letting imposter syndrome get in the way and
Yeah.
not including things that are worthwhile. The other thing I'll say is just when someone, honestly, nothing is more unappealing than opening up a resume and it just being messy, like spelling errors and like poor formatting. And because to me, think about it, right? What is coding? It's like typing and being organized, and you have to have clean code.
Hmm.
So if your resume is a mess, what does that say about your code? So I think that's like a surefire way to just get tossed out.
So
And then
I
I
got in trouble one time for recommending photos on the resume. I was like, talk to me about that. Like, school me, help me understand.
yeah, here's the thing. So two parts, right? I think generally you don't want to have too much, like I said, nothing flashy or over the top on the resume because it's just not needed. And sometimes, not all the time, but depending on the company's applicant tracking system, the system they use to like process applications, if
Sure.
your resume is like designed or has images on it, like a picture, it can get rejected before anyone ever looks at it. So like you're literally potentially shooting yourself in the foot before you even get out the door. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is on pictures, like it's not about what you look like, it's about your work experience. And so I oftentimes think the picture can take away from that. And that's why we have
Hmm.
LinkedIn, right? It's a professional networking site. It's about getting connected with people. And so yes, put your picture there, all of that. But your resume, you really want to highlight your experience. And a lot of times what I'll see is people will put a picture and it takes up valuable real estate on their resume that could be used
Right.
for things like projects and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thanks. That's helpful. I had a person who used to work in HR and talked about the reason they rejected resumes with pictures was it was like the amount of people I forgot what it is, where you have to hire, you're not being like, basically you're not being racist in your hiring processes. Like,
Yeah, it
so
makes it hard for equity and things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I know there's a much better way to say that was the caveman way of saying it, but yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
that's what I
definitely
heard.
hopefully that's getting better nowadays as that conversation becomes more prevalent, but it's definitely
Right.
something to consider. Yeah.
Interesting. So okay, so I have a resume. I've applied to a job. I've landed that thing, and I'm about to do a phone interview, that phone screen or that Zoom initial screen. What are some tips I can use to make that really go well for me?
Yeah. So I always tell folks that no to interview. So preparing can be tricky for sure and overwhelming, but that
Hmm.
initial phone screen is usually about them just making sure you say who you are, and that's that first thing. And then the second
Okay.
piece is that they're trying to understand how and why you're a fit for that job. So
Yeah.
what I would do is I would start by the first thing I do is research the company. What do they do? Why does that interest you? And why do you want to work for them? Know that before you go into the phone screen. And then the second thing that I recommend folks do is an exercise that I call vetting yourself against the job description. So you literally go line by line on the job description, what they're looking for, and ask yourself, how do I possess this? What experience do I have in this? What can I talk about? What projects utilize these skills? And then what that does is it helps you take an inventory on yourself against the job. And so you're super ready going into that phone screen, like consciously and subconsciously, to talk about yourself, what you're capable of,
Yeah.
and why you might be a really good fit for the job. And then the very, very last thing is it really is so important to take time to think about your answer to that question, tell me about yourself. It's usually the first
Hmm.
question out of the gate, and it usually sets up the stage for the conversation. And so I tell folks, really take the time to figure out the answer to that question. And in my mind, the structure that works best is tell them who you are currently as a programmer, your technical skills, tell them a little bit about a project, tell them about your background. What are those transferable skills? What are your accomplishments? And then try to tie those two things together in the end by explaining how those two skill sets make you the right fit for that job. That's a really
Yeah.
powerful answer to that question.
That's awesome. But like, how long should that be though? Like, if I'm talking, if it's been is 5 minutes too long? Like, where
5 minutes
how does
is
that?
too long. Yeah. I would aim for 2.5 minutes max.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. Super cool. Good to know. And I love how you had Oh, there was something you had mentioned. I forgot it though. I blanked out.
It's okay.
I was taking notes. I was writing things out too while you're to talk to
No,
me
you're
about
good. No
too.
worries.
So yeah, so let's talk about landing a job without experience. Because this is it, right? This is the crux of all coding boot camps. And like what does that look like? How should I best prepare to like land a job if I don't have any experience?
So I'm going to challenge that and say
Okay.
that the boot camp is your experience and your background
Hmm.
is your experience. So unless you didn't finish the boot camp and have absolutely no prior work experience, there's no such thing as no experience. And I think it really is a
Right.
mindset thing. The grads I've worked with who are successful are the ones who know how to talk about their boot camp experience like experience, right? Like I said, tell me who can talk the talk. So that's the first thing that's really important. And then the second thing that I think is really helpful is my advice to all the grads I work with is once you get out of the program, immediately start a new project. Reach out to friends. Does someone need a business website? Look at nonprofits in
Right.
your area, or just build a project that resonates with
Hmm.
the kinds of jobs you're interested in applying to. That way, when you're in the interview, when they ask you, hey, what are you working on? You can say, yeah, I'm building a wedding website for my best friend, or I'm working with a small business in town and redoing their menu. I worked with a grad who's phenomenal. She was like one of the most incredible grads I've ever worked with. She worked in the restaurant industry,
Okay.
but she also, when she finished the program, immediately went to a restaurant in town. This is right when COVID hit. So the job market was rotten, right? Everybody was getting laid off. And she said, hey, I'll redo your menu page for free so you can do online ordering. And she did, put it on her resume, and she got a job like that because she
Wow.
had that
Awesome.
real world experience on her resume.
Yeah, totally. I built I had WordPress. I did a bunch of WordPress websites. So like what's your advice on that? If because most of the times, yeah, I did the same thing, right? Like when people tell me that, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But yeah, talk about that a little bit.
I think if you're applying to jobs that require WordPress, then sure, yeah, that's like relevant. But
Yeah.
I think employers are more so looking for like your hard coding skills.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't necessarily put a ton of those on there. I also think with your resume, it's about quality over quantity. So whatever you put on there in terms of your projects, you want to make sure they're relevant, that they speak to your skill or that they show something relevant to the kinds of jobs you're applying to.
Yeah, totally with you. I think my like the WordPress stuff, at least for me, helped me show off my design because
Mm,
that's the easiest part where you can just make things. Because I although like I didn't use a template, like I actually designed it. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. I want to talk to you about how, like, you're a junior dev or you're just out of coding boot camp, and all these job applications say, I need 6 years of experience. I need 4 years of experience. I need 2 years of experience. I just came out. Like, I've been coding for 6 months. Like, how do I find a job that I can apply to?
Yeah, first things first, job descriptions are wish lists. They're not requirements. So the two things I always tell people to just disregard entirely is years of experience and education because they're not hiring you for your degree. You're not going to bring that to
Right.
work every day. You don't have to show that to get in the door. And experience is relevant, right? I know folks who have been coding for 2 years who are not nearly as good as someone who coded for 6 years. It's about like raw talent to a certain degree and
Sure.
problem solving and creativity. What they are hiring you for, though, is what you're going to be doing daily at that job. So I would look at
Yeah.
those things. My rule of thumb is if the job is listed as an entry level job, apply to it. I don't care how many years of
Okay.
experience it asks for. When React first came out, people were seeing job descriptions that said things like must have 5 years of React. And they were like, React's only been around for 2 years. How can anyone have five
Right.
years of experience in React? So I think you just have to take it with a grain of salt and just apply. I see it happen. One of the first grads I worked with at Coding Dojo got a job in .NET and he didn't know, he took Python, Ruby, and JavaScript. And he got a job in .NET because he showed that he was creative, he was a problem solver, and he had really stellar projects. So I say apply anyway and disregard years of experience, education. It's not. And this is also, I should mention, in the time that I've worked with employers, especially at Coding Dojo, I would talk to employers and say, the job says 5 years, I don't have anyone for you. And they would say, oh no, we don't actually care. We just want a good programmer. So
Right.
it's not something to worry about.
Awesome. Awesome. Hopefully brought the anxiety level down of some people that are watching this and are like, oh, I can actually apply for some of these. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a scary place to be for sure. So what's one thing that like maybe someone has done to land a job that's a little out of the ordinary that maybe we can replicate out of they broke the rules of the job search? Like anything you've seen like that?
Yeah, I'll just share some of my favorite things that I've seen grads do. At Thinkful recently, there was a grad who created a TikTok pitch. Like he made a pitch on TikTok. It was awesome. It was like
Okay.
creative and fun and totally outside of the box. And he put it on LinkedIn and it got a lot of traction and helped him get some interviews too. So that was just something I personally had not seen anyone ever do, which was really great. I've also seen a lot of grads, they will build a resume or a cover letter that is like the landing page of that company. So for Zillow, for example, right? They'll build like a resume that looks like a Zillow landing page, and that's really creative as well. But some of the things that I've seen honestly most successful is I had a grad once who just blogged really regularly. She was a data science grad. And she blogged really regularly and shared those blogs. And that's how she got her job. She wrote a blog that kind of went viral and she got a job from it. And then the most common thing that people do that seems outside of the box, but is actually just like a no-brainer and everyone should do is networking. So doing cold outreach and talking to people, the more people who know that you're looking for a job, the more likely you are to get one.
Yeah, I have this philosophy. I'm working with newer devs and stuff, and I'm like, hey, you can do it two ways. You can hunt for a job where like you're job hunting, or you can fish for a job. And fishing for me looks like YouTube, blogs, going to community events, like things where people can see you, hear from you, see like, and it's been funny because I had this a couple, like maybe a week or two ago, I had this random guy like just trying to convince me for probably 20-30 minutes to like apply for a job at his company. And I was like, I'm good, man. I'm happy right now. And it's just, I've seen it work. And
and it's about, I always tell my grads, it's about working smarter, not harder. And people underestimate, like I tell my grads all the time, you would be shocked. In fact, I worked with a grad not too long ago who also was really involved with his church. And he put a call out to his church and just said, hey, I graduated this boot camp. I'm just seeing if there's anyone here who like knows anything about programming. And you got a job like that because people were like, yeah, let me introduce you to this person or talk to this person, or why don't you send me your resume and I'll pass it along. And that is the best way to get a job, right? Like you said, put yourself out there, talk to people, get involved. If you're just going to apply all day, it's going to take forever to get a job and you're going to feel so demoralized.
Yeah. So what are some things you've seen people get disqualified from the hiring process?
Yeah, one of the ones that kills me because this is such a great grad.
Tell stories. We love stories.
He was a fantastic grad. He ended up getting a job, but I had a grad once. Actually, I'll share two stories about this grad. The first is he was awesome, but we sent his resume for an opening, and the employer told us his resume looks awesome, his portfolio looks great, but his GitHub hasn't been updated in 3 months, so I'm not interviewing him. So just because he hadn't been pushing his work to GitHub, the hiring manager didn't want to hire him because to him that meant he wasn't active, he wasn't practicing, and he wasn't really passionate about coding. So that was a bummer. That same grad, though, I'll say he had an interview for a job at Groupon, and he bombed the interview. He bombed it, but he got moved to the next round, and the hiring manager told him, he said, I'm going to move you forward because you didn't give up, even though you didn't know the answer, and you kept coming to the table with new solutions. And so he got moved forward to the next round of the interview process strictly because of that, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a super awesome story. What do you think are like the top, like maybe 3 biggest mistakes people make in the interview process? If you could tell everyone, don't do these 3 things in their entire process, what would they be?
Yeah, the number one is people don't realize how much they underestimate themselves in the interview and how they talk down about themselves and say things like, I'm junior, or I'm still learning, or I'm just switching, or I don't know that much yet. That's literally stuff people say. And I always tell people, imagine if you go on a blind date and you sit down at the table and you say, oh, I'm surprised you showed up. I'm hideous. I didn't think you were going to come. You would never say that. So in an interview, it's the same thing. If the first thing you say is, I'm surprised you're interviewing me because I don't know anything, you're not going to get that job. So be aware of drawing attention to the negative. Like, instead of focusing on what you don't have, focus on what you do have, what you can offer
Yeah.
them. That's important. Not knowing your projects well enough to talk about them, like really know your projects, be prepared to talk about them. And then the other mistake is just not preparing, not knowing anything about the company or why you want to work there or what technologies they use. That's a big mistake.
Yeah, I've totally seen that. One of my first things I do is when I'm looking at a job, I look at the vision and values and the CEO.
Mhm.
I'll read through all their about us page and stuff like that. Cause it's like, like, for example, I know Amazon will literally ask you questions and say, our value is this. How do you
Mhm.
live this out in your daily life?
Mhm.
And if you're like, I don't, or they're like, why do we want to talk to you? It's over. Good luck, you
Exactly.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Employers want to hire, they don't want to hire someone who wants a salary. They want to hire someone who is excited about working there. So at Thinkful, I help interview our new coaches that we bring on. And we interviewed a coach once. I'll never forget this. And we asked her, what do you know about Thinkful and why do you want to work here? And she was sitting in a dark room and she paused and we saw her eyes move like to her browser and like type and like colors, like the screen was changing. Tell that she was like researching the company in the moment. And I was like, we can't hire this person. They don't actually care
That's
about
so
this
funny.
company, which is so
Yeah,
important. You have to be passionate about the students. So yeah, that's a big mistake in any industry.
for sure. For sure. That's good stuff. I want to talk to you about imposter syndrome.
Yes.
So I remember sitting in my office. I finally had my first job. It's like stand up time, and everyone's talking about all the things they accomplished yesterday. And I am on the same bug that I have been on for 4 days in a row. And everyone else is, yeah, yesterday I just completely refactored the entire Amazon web server instance. And I'm like, yeah, I still couldn't get the color to change from green to blue when you mouse over it. So I'm gonna keep working on that today. You know, how do we deal with imposter syndrome? It's so
Yeah.
scary.
It's such a real thing. I have imposter syndrome. I work with some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with in my life, and I experience imposter syndrome literally every single day. So I get it. I hear it. We all feel it. Melinda Gates has a really great LinkedIn article about her own imposter syndrome. So if Melinda Gates has
Interesting.
imposter syndrome, then I think we're okay. Um,
Right.
yeah, I think it's about knowing, first of all, everybody has it, everybody experiences it, and that what from yourself is often not how other people perceive you. And
Mm-hmm.
remember that there's always going to be someone who knows more than you, which means there are people like more than other people. And so I think a really good way to combat imposter syndrome is to stay in your own lane. What are your goals? What are the things you want to measure yourself by? Don't measure yourself by someone else. That is a surefire way to fail and have a miserable life. So stay in your own lane. What are your goals? What is it that you want to accomplish? And then don't forget to, if you're really experiencing bad imposter syndrome, don't forget to go back and see your growth, right? What has helped you, like acknowledge those wins and like measure your growth. Weirdly enough, it seems counterintuitive, but I think another really great way to battle imposter syndrome is to talk to other people. Because I think the more you talk to other developers, you realize, oh, I know a lot. So many of my grads are hesitant to go to networking events, and then they go to the networking event and they go, oh, I know a lot. So that's another really good way to kind of battle that.
Yeah. One of the things I realized too, I think some of the tips I had too would probably be like humble yourself and feel free to like voice what's going on to maybe some of your other engineers or to
Yeah.
your boss where you're like, hey, like they know, right? So that you're like, I'm just really dealing with some imposter syndrome. Like, but what I mean by humble yourself is being like, is there any way I could like really, is there any resources you would recommend? Can you, or to someone on your team, can you show me how you did that thing so
Yeah.
fast? Walk me through this piece of code. I don't get it. If
Yeah.
you coming in as a learner, I feel lets them give grace to you because then they're on your team. Like they're not all against you, right? Like you've brought people on your team.
Yeah.
And the second thing I saw was like when I would compare myself to the fellow devs around me, and I
Uh-huh.
was like, I just felt so bad. But when they would look at what I was doing, because like I said, I hang out more on the creative front. So I was doing some of the designing and I was doing some of the color schemes, and like I brought in some of my like past knowledge of like stuff
Yeah.
like that and the aesthetics. And at that point they were, like they felt like they were
Yeah.
imposters around me in that area.
Mhm.
And so I can't specifically say that, but I could say that
No,
because I
but
don't know what they were feeling.
yeah,
But do you know what I mean?
and it's so true. The thing you feel insecure about, I guarantee you there's someone who feels insecurity as well because of quality. Sorry, my dog just got home from being out of town for a
Oh,
week. But I guarantee there's someone who feels imposter syndrome in reverse because of a quality you possess. And I think your point about being vulnerable and like asking for help is spot on because that's really how you learn. And again, how you might discover that you might know more than you think you do.
true, true. Man, this has been full of absolute gold today. I appreciate your time. We're coming up on an hour here, so
Yeah.
I want to respect your time. But it's been so cool to reconnect with you and hear how things are going at Thinkful. And I think what you have is going to really help people. Before we go though, how can people connect with you? How can they,
Yeah,
follow
yeah.
you? Share some of that stuff.
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to connect with me. I'm my just under my name, or if you want to share it, my
Yeah, I'll
LinkedIn.
share your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, yeah. But feel free to connect, send me a message. If you have questions about Thinkful or Coding Dojo, I'm happy to answer those or boot camps in general. Yeah, and they say if you love it, go for it.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate so much your time. That'll be it for today. So thanks for hanging out. For all of you that watched it to the end of this video, you guys are amazing. And let us know what your thoughts are on coding boot camps in the comments. All right, see you later.